sorry, you guys. I'm so late. College applications, they crazy. Yeah, and I've missed recording so much. Like, I'm so happy right now. It's crazy. I missed you guys. I was literally going through old videos and just reading all the comments, being like, I missed this so much. So now I'm back, and I'm happy again. Woo! And to make me even happier, I get on to chapter 26 to read the fanfiction, and the author left a note. It is so sweet. They linked my channel with the playlist, and then they're like, keep up the good work. I appreciate you. You're too nice. Thank you so much. I feel the joy. You're amazing, and I love your writing. Thank you. Yeah, so that's what I got. My brain is mush at the moment. I'm so sorry. But I remember what I was going to say. Make sure to go support the author because we love authors in this community. The link to this fanfiction as well as the music and sound effects are all linked in the description below. So go check it out. I know you want to. You know you want to. So do it. All right. Let's get into this because I am ready. I am ready. Gonna quit decathlon again? Peter looked up from his homework to his friend sitting across from him. After the day had ended, Shay had insisted that they finish their homework first before Spider-Man took off into the city. That resulted in both of them sitting on the stone bench in the courtyard, legs crossed and facing one another. Not how one should properly sit on the bench at all. Their textbooks and folders spread between them and backpacks off to the side. Nah. Peter shook his head as he erased an answer and scribbled down a new one. I ended up rejoining for nationals anyway, and I needed to get to Washington for the thing with Toombs. Shay nodded and turned back to her paper. Who assigns homework on the first day? She muttered under her breath after flipping the paper over and continuing to fly through questions. Isenheimer, that's who, Peter responded. Others gave some too. The girl pointed out, holding up the worksheet she was doing now, one for chemistry. She put it back down and furrowed her eyebrows. Granted, it's just one of those getting to know you. And Isa Minor gave us a 3-page packet of just a bunch of math problems. Peter clicked his tongue as he looked over the next problem before he began writing down another answer. Your handwriting is horrible. Shay's voice came from above him. His eyes moved up, and his head tilted a bit to see her leaning forward and looking down at the sheet he was writing on. Yours isn't much better, he shot back, glaring at her a bit. I can write neatly, she said, crossing her arms and leaning back again. When I want to. So can I, Peter defended. I've yet to see it in action, though, Spider-Boy. Peter bit back a few choice words, and instead settled on saying, I hate you. You know that, right? Aw, friendship at its finest. Peter shook his head and turned his attention back to the paper in front of him. Time became a bit of a blur as he moved steadily through the problems. He distantly heard Shay humming something from where she sat a few feet away from him, a Hamilton song. He was too far into his homework to focus enough to figure out whether or not it was the middle of Satisfied or the end of Congratulations. He wasn't sure if it really mattered. Yoda was almost played by a monkey in a mask. Peter looked up in surprise and confusion. What? Shay was on her phone, an old device with a cracked screen that looked like it belonged in a museum, scrolling through something. I'm just stating facts. Peter snorted. Feel free to state facts relating to the homework. Yoda has no determined species. What is with all these Yoda facts? We could all do with more Yoda facts. True. Speaking of which, the girl said as she continued scrolling, Yoda is not a Muppet. Peter furrowed his eyebrows. Can I get context for that? No. Peter sighed and looked back down at the worksheet he was attempting to finish, the last one he needed to do for his homework before he was done for the day. Depending on what movie you're watching, Yoda will have a different number of toes. Peter raised an eyebrow. I'm assuming no explaining that one either. Nope. Another sigh escaped his mouth, but the teen felt a smile pulling on his lips as he turned back to his paper and waited for his friend to interrupt him again. After a minute, she hadn't, so he asked, "You got any more?" "No," she replied. "At least no more for Yoda, and I had a theme going that I don't want to break." Peter laughed. "Cool. You'll let me finish my homework then?" "Yeah," Shay nodded. "You got people to save anyways." Peter felt a grin appear on his face at her words. "Thanks." Shay nodded once again, but remained silent, choosing instead to tuck her homework back away into her bag, as well as the math textbook, one they had laid out just in case they needed it while they did Isa Minor's packet. They didn't. Done! Shay clapped at her friend's explanation with much more enthusiasm than necessary. "And the crowd goes wild!" she exclaimed, hopping up and bouncing around in circles. "Shay, stop," Peter said, his cheeks growing a bit red as he glanced around. "People are staring." That stopped the girl immediately. Her hands fell and she sat back down quickly, her lips pressed tightly closed. Her face had exploded in blush and she kept her head down, her eyes trained on the ground. After a minute, she asked quietly, "What about now?" Peter looked at their surroundings. The students that milled around weren't paying attention to them anymore. Not that many had in the first place. "No one's looking anymore." The girl relaxed a bit. Her body seemed to untense with his words. She glanced at her friend and, at his confused look, said, "I was embarrassed." Peter cracked a smile. "Same." Shay rolled her eyes, but her face seemed to light up a bit. Peter finished zipping up his bag, and both friends stood up in a single, synchronized motion. "That was like out of a movie," Peter said as they made their way off of the school grounds and towards an alleyway. "The whole standing in unison thing, I mean." Shay nodded emphatically. "It was awesome." "Only because we're awesome." "Most definitely." The girl dragged them into an alley a moment later. "There's never anyone in this one," she said as Peter took off his backpack and pulled out his Spider-Man suit a moment later. Shay turned away, looking out at the street as her friend pulled off his clothes and pulled on his superhero suit. "Alright, I'm good," Peter said. Shay turned around to see not Peter, but Spider-Man standing there. "Cool," she grinned. "You can give me a lift home, right?" "Yeah, sure." Spider-Man nodded, taking a few steps forward. "Good, you're learning to agree with me," she said, her smile growing. "Give me your phone." She could see her friend's confusion, but he listened anyway, handing her his phone after jabbing in his password. Shay snorted as her fingers flew across the screen. "You don't take very good care of your stuff, huh?" "A cracked screen. How disappointing. I thought you were better than this, Spidey." Peter crossed his arms. "Like you're any better." The corners of her lips tilted up as she fought a smile, but she scoffed. "Don't distract from your own mistakes." "I'm never allowed to win an argument with you, am I?" You're making an admirable effort, though." She seemed to find what she was looking for as she smiled in satisfaction. She held the phone screen close to her eyes and studied it before exhaling through her nose and closing her eyes. Peter watched in fascination as her features shifted. It wasn't something he thought he would ever be able to describe if someone asked what it was like to watch. But a few minutes passed as she slowly began to change. Her hair color was the first part to become different. The change seemed to start in the roots of her hair, as gradually the strands changed color, starting at her scalp and working its way down to her end of pieces of hair. Peter noticed as he watched this shift that her hair length was different after the transformation, something he hadn't noticed the first time. Like before though, the hair seemed to perfect itself. Messy strands settled down until she looked as if she'd just come out of the salon. It was rather disconcerting, actually. No one should have their hair sit that perfectly. As a light breeze blew through the alleyway, the hair shifted and Peter found himself a bit relieved when the colorful locks shifted as hair would, not settling back into their initial style, but moving around as hair should. At least it wasn't as creepily perfect as it could be. As Peter tore his eyes away from her hair when Shay's normally colored locks became fully colorful, he he found that her facial features had changed already. As before, he could see his friend, but her features were sharpened, and it comforted the teen a bit to know that the subtle changes could probably fool facial recognition scans. It was surprisingly fun to watch the star freckles appear on her face. All sorts of sizes, though all rather small of course, of stars appeared in sprays over her nose and across the top of her cheeks. They seemed to sparkle a bit, and Peter felt that they should. They were stars after all. When Shay opened her eyes, they were once again those mesmerizing galaxies from the first time she had changed her appearance around. Peter smiled a bit. He liked that feature of her change the most. "Here," the girl said, handing him his phone back. Peter pressed the button on the side and the screen turned to black. "What was the point of that?" he asked. "You're always being recorded and put on YouTube," she explained. "I don't want to be questioned at school about why I was seen with Spider-Man." Peter nodded. "Understandable. I don't really like conversing with random human beings either." Shay snorted before saying, "I don't think that's a good trait for a superhero, Spidey boy. I manage." She shook her head and picked up her bag, pulling it over her shoulders before grabbing Peter's backpack as well, and looping her arm through both straps until it was hanging off of her arm. "What are you doing?" "I'm taking your backpack to my apartment for you to pick up after patrol because May doesn't need to buy another one for you right now." Peter was grateful for his mask as his face exploded into a red hue as he nodded. Thanks." "You got it, Spidey." A minute later, the two best friends were in the sky propelling through the air by Peter's webs. They took a break on a train heading in the general direction they wanted to go and talked. "It's a lot easier to carry you when you aren't passed out, you know?" Shay laughed. "I'd imagine so." A few more minutes passed before they ended up on the platform just outside of Shay's window. "Thanks," the girl said as she pulled her apartment key out and unlocked the window. "I'm never going to stop owing Lob for getting this lock installed for me," she muttered as she pushed open the window. She turned back to her friend a moment later. "I'm not bringing your bag to you tomorrow, so you better not stay out too late." Peter nodded. "Glad to know you have my back." Shay grinned and slapped his shoulder lightly as she began to climb into her apartment. "I'm joking. I just don't want to have to bring it tomorrow, and it would be amazing if my best friend would come so he could take his stuff to school himself." Yeah, I get it," Peter said, slapping her hand away. "I'll come get it." "Get going then, Spider Boy," Shay said, leaning out her window to push him a bit. "Go stop some crime." Peter wondered if she could see his smile from under his mask, but he didn't think it really mattered. He nodded firmly and turned, sending a web off through the alley and to the building that was across the street. He gave a small wave to his friend before swinging off. He was gone a second later. Shay was, unsurprisingly, watching a Hamilton automatic when Spider-Man knocked on her window that evening. It was dark out, but the girl was awake, of course. "Hey, Petey," she said, grinning at him. "Fancy meeting you here." "Indeed," Peter nodded as he ripped off his mask. Shay frowned as she looked at his face. "What happened?" Peter's cheeks became flushed a bit. "Spidey's sense wasn't fast enough, I guess. Mugger got a few punches in." Shay stared at him with a hard gaze, causing him to quickly say, "I'm fine though." Shay let out a huff of air and turned abruptly, disappearing down the hallway. He heard a door opening and then closing a moment later. She reappeared holding her first aid box under her arm. "Sit down." Peter shook his head. "I've got advanced healing, Shay. I'll be fine." "Not if you get an infection, genius." Peter wanted to argue more, but she grabbed him and shoved him onto the couch. He opened his mouth ready to speak, but she gave him a pleading look. "Peter, please. Just let me calm my conscience." Peter felt the words die in his throat and closed his mouth slowly before nodding mutely. "Thank you." A moment later, Peter had a Dora the Explorer-themed band-aid on the cut on his cheek, and was holding an ice pack against his eye at his friend's direction. "Hopefully that'll help," she said. "I know you have fast healing, but I wouldn't be surprised if the black eye lasted until the end of tomorrow." "You underestimate my abilities, my friend." Shay laughed but stopped when Alice spoke. "There's someone at the door." "Who is it?" the girl asked, clipping the lid of the first aid bin into place before moving to the door. "William. Lob." The AI corrected herself quickly. "Oh, really?" Shay moved to the door faster and opened it a moment later. "Hey, Lob." "Evening, Shay." Lob peered inside her apartment and his face lit up. "Parker, fancy seeing you here." He looked a bit closer. "What's up with your eye, kid?" "Picked a fight he shouldn't have," Shay answered for him. Lob nodded sympathetically. "Bullies?" Yeah," Peter nodded. "Yeah, bullies." "It'll get better, kid. Don't worry." Peter nodded and Lob turned his gaze back to the girl in front of him. "I didn't see you after school today." Came in the window. That would do it. Anyways," Lob said. "Because you didn't come in the main door, I'm here to give you this." Lob handed her the letter he had been grasping in his one hand. "Normally," the man said as the girl took the envelope, "I would have waited until you were in the lobby again, but it looked important." Shay nodded and grinned. "Thanks, Lob." "No problem, kid." Lob tipped his head towards her. "Night, Shay. Parker?" "Good night, Lob." "See you, Lob." Shay closed the door as the man walked back to the elevator a moment later. "Who's the letter from?" Peter asked, his eyes lighting up with curiosity. "I don't know." The girl turned the letter over and read the outside of it. Her mouth fell open. "Who's it from?" Peter asked, standing up and moving towards her. "Says it's from Stark Industries." "Stark Industries?" "Yeah." There was a silence before Peter grinned and said, "Open it, dude!" Shay needed no more direction. She tore open the letter carefully and pulled out the sheet of paper. "I would have thought they'd email me or something," she said as she began unfolding the paper. "Probably did both." Shay unfolded the paper for the last time, and her eyes began to fly over the typed words on the letter. Peter could see through the paper the shadow of the SI logo stamped onto the corner. As the girl finished reading, her jaw was on the floor and her eyes were wide with shock. The paper slipped out of her hand. Peter quickly stooped down and picked it up. As he began to read it, he asked, "What is it? What did it say?" They're offering me an internship." "Tony, I have something I need to ask you." The billionaire spun around to see his girlfriend and the CEO of his company, Pepper Potts, standing near the entrance of his lab. "Yes, oh so lovely, Pepper." Pepper sighed and made her way over to him, pulling out a few papers from a folder she had been holding under her arm. "I want you to take on a new intern." Tony raised an eyebrow. "A new intern? Pepper, we already have a few hundred of those, don't we? Why are you talking to me about this?" Pepper tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "This is a special case." "I'm listening." "First of all, this potential intern is in high school." "High school?" Tony was even more surprised than before. "We only take on college students at a minimum, Pep. You know this. We made the policy together when we started the internship program. High schoolers aren't on the level they need to be to work here." "I'm quite sure this candidate is," Pepper said. "But that's beside the point. Additionally, this intern wouldn't be working with the others." "Then where would this supposed intern work?" he asked, egging her on a bit as he began to pick up his coffee mug to drink some of it as he listened to her words. "With you, as a personal intern." Tony was glad he hadn't taken a sip of his drink yet, because it would have been spat all over his work right about now. A personal intern? Pep, you can't be serious. Why not? She asked, raising an eyebrow. None of our interns could handle my work, first off, let alone a high schooler. Also, teenagers are annoying. I wouldn't be able to get anything done. It wouldn't be every day, Pepper said, crossing her arms. It would only be a few days a week. This candidate has a good record, too. I'm sure you'd be fine. Who is this candidate you've ever so carefully selected anyways? Pepper took out her tablet and slid her finger around on it deftly before sliding it upward. Tony's work on the large screen was pushed aside and what looked like a file appeared instead. In the corner was a picture of a teenage girl. Her hair fell in wisps around her face, and her eyes were wide, sparkling orbs that seemed to jump out of the screen. She seemed to hold a certain innocence about her, and Tony was vaguely reminded of a certain teenage superhero that swung around Queens and bugged Happy to no end as well. This, Pepper said, gesturing to the girl on the screen, is Shay Lane. She lives in Queens. How's her record? Clean. Nothing of any kind on her school record, and she has no criminal record. Age? Tony asked, nibbling the end of his glasses as he looked at the teenager on the screen and turned slightly back and forth in his chair. 15 years old, Pepper replied, scrolling down a bit to where the information was and zoomed in. She is a sophomore in high school. What school? Midtown. The name sounded familiar, and a moment later, Tony realized that it was the school that the kid attended. How ironic. That's a pretty good school, right? One of the best, Pepper confirmed. She's on their decathlon team, which is about to go to nationals in a few weeks. Tony nodded. Impressive. How are her grades? Top of her class, Pepper said. At least last year. Their school started today, actually. Got top marks on all her finals last year, and she's in advanced versions of classes that are advanced for her age as well. Any specific comments from her teachers last year? Nothing out of the ordinary. All said she was impossibly smart. And there are also a few things commenting on how strangely close her and who I would assume is her best friend, a classmate named Peter Parker. Tony almost dropped his mug. Almost. Peter Parker. Smart kid, good record. Grades aren't as crazily high as hers, but he is in second for his year. Pepper stated. We had a background check run on him as well, to be safe. Oh, was all he said, nodding weakly. What were the chances that the one teenager out of all of them in the city that Pepper could choose, it happened to be the Spider Kid's best friend? Pretty damn high, apparently. So, what's your answer? My answer? Tony blinked at her. Technically, because Shay is a high schooler and would be your personal intern, you need to sign your agreement before the offer can be sent to her. Pepper eyed him. What do you say? What would personal intern entail? You work with her once every, 2 weeks and tell her what to do otherwise. So he didn't have to deal with the kid that much either way. Tony thought for a moment, his gaze moving around the room full of tech before landing on the girl's face on the screen. He felt something inside of him snap for some reason and nodded. You know what? What the hell? Let's do it. He plucked the pen from the desk and quickly signed the paper that Pepper held out for him on the clipboard that she had gotten from somewhere. I'm proud of you, Tony, Pepper said. What's it for this time? He asked cheekily. The woman shook her head but was smiling. I just am. Before Tony could ask her anything else, she had entered the elevator and the doors had already closed behind her. Alright, you know what? I am starting to believe some of you guys. Tony Stark is probably her father. Yeah, I can kind of see it now. I can see it. I'm genuinely curious to hear some of your guys' theories, so leave them in the comments because I want to know. Who do you think think Shay's father is. Dude, Tony Stark should really just be like, Shay, I am your father. Except she'd be like, yay! Alright, that's all I got. I'll see you the next one, guys, and I hope you enjoyed.